That night, a dangerous secret was exposed in a moment of weakness, and it threatened to shake everything to its very core. Once again, Dean was abroad on business. Eventually, I grew accustomed to it. On the other hand, I had company this time. But I still felt an odd unease that words couldn't describe. It wasn't that I felt lonely. Rather, there was an inner emptiness that I wished I could ignore. I chose to do something for myself in order to clear my brain. A brief respite. Anything to temporarily occupy that void. My stepson Francis had gone to visit a friend, and now that Dean had left, the home was deserted. No sound. With the intention of unwinding, I put down a little glass, poured myself a glass of rich red wine, and took a seat. The next thing I knew, I cranked up the volume on the TV. The house was silent save for the occasional television flicker, and there was just me. I wanted nothing more than to fill the space and fight off the growing sense of loneliness at that very moment. The wine made me feel more at ease, and the sound of the television engulfed me. My internal strain appeared to release for an instant. Get ready for more riveting true stories much like this one. Subscribing to my channel is greatly appreciated. Please enjoy the video and watch it all the way to the finish because I guarantee you this story is worth your time. Leave a comment with your ideas as well. As if by magic, the door swung open. I seriously doubted it was Francis returning from seeing a friend at first. Just a few moments ago, I had been experiencing a profound sense of solitude. Someone was behind me before I could even comprehend what was happening. Unbeknownst to me, Francis had sneaked in through the door. No time to turn down the volume on the booming TV. I hardly had a second to react. I felt a sudden surge of humiliation wash over me as the noise level rose. Looking at one another in disbelief, we both came to a sudden halt. His gaze was perplexing, and mine betrayed the obvious embarrassment of being taken unawares. I felt a tremor run through my body. It was all a mystery to me. My heart was racing, and I was barely able to breathe as I swiftly spun around. It was already too late when I clumsily turned off the TV. In that instant, time seemed to stand still. Neither he nor I could face his staring eyes. We remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. There was a heavy, uncomfortable, and stifling stillness. I made an effort to compose myself. Words came out choppy because my throat felt parched. My apologies. I believed I was the only one. I mumbled something, but my voice was so unsteady that I couldn't even believe it. I could not bear the palpitations any longer. I could sense its radiance emanating from me. Francis was silent for a while, but then he smiled at me. A peculiar, nearly icy grin. Rest assured, he reassured her with a smile. At times, we all attempt to cope with feelings of isolation. Okay, I see. Can you explain what he meant? It was unclear to me. His words appeared multi-layered, as if they contained more meaning. Unspoken words. In his gaze, it seemed as though he was trying to find something. However, the very thought of it made me too terrified to do it. For a bit longer we remained motionless. I was at a loss for words to bridge the gap between us. Since I was at a loss for words, I simply stared at the floor. After that I said something, but it sounded strange coming out of my lips. As Francis stepped away, he avoided making eye contact. I was just here to get something, but maybe later, he replied after giving me a quiet nod. He halted mid-sentence. He swiftly pivoted and exited the home instead. Everything seemed distant and entangled in knots at that moment. I felt totally unbalanced. Attempting to relax myself, I took a deep breath, but it was ineffective. Being fidgety made me uncomfortable. Everything went back to being a complete mess the second I thought I had it under control. I dipped into the house's stillness after Francis departed. I couldn't believe it. Out of nowhere, I sensed a complete shift. There was this emptiness inside me, as if something had gone wrong with my life, and the sound of the TV was still ringing in the room. I rose from the couch and gingerly made my way to the bedroom, but Francis's face lingered in my thoughts at every turn. I nearly began to question my own sanity due to how bizarre it seemed. For a living, Dean drove trucks. He frequently disappeared for days, sometimes even weeks at a time. He rarely made an appearance. This was normal for me, but tonight, this felt different. With Dean's departure and Francis's return, all those years spent alone seemed like a distant memory. My entire reality seemed to have turned upside down. After Francis returned from college 2 weeks earlier, He noticed a significant change. After spending a great deal of time alone, I found myself unexpectedly sharing a home with another human being, a grown-up, the grandson of my stepfather. I didn't know how to even begin to describe this. Francis was a knowledgeable, serious, and remarkable 25-year-old. However, something was awakened inside of me when I faced him in that way. His intense gaze made me feel as though he were observing me through a different lens. Gently settling onto the bed, I rested my head on the pillow and shut my eyes. Things couldn't get any more difficult in my opinion. This sensation, what was it? Were you scared? A yearning? Once again, I opened my eyes and remained in the shadows for some more time. I wondered what it all meant that night. I went to sleep after a while. However, my internal discomfort persisted upon waking up. Breakfast was being made as the first light of day began to peek through the window. But today I felt like something was missing. There was an air of odd carefulness about the house's contents. As the bread toasted and the teapot chimed, my mind continued to wander to the events of the previous night. Francis arrived at breakfast looking somewhat more composed, but his expression remained intense. He started setting the table without uttering a word. However, he broke the stillness first. "I apologize. I didn't intend to make you look foolish last night," he said. Now his voice is lower. "Trust me when I say that I slipped in without a sound. I was completely unprepared. I was preoccupied with other matters because I was also dealing with problems with Barry. Our breakup is recent. Sorry, I was preoccupied." I felt compelled to answer even though the topic of Barry seemed too sensitive to broach. "Francis, I understand. It's really not a major issue. It's simply, I admit that I can be a bit of a slob when no one is looking." My voice was still trembling as I spoke. Perhaps, though, he was able to discern my true emotions. Perhaps Francis was observing me with a keener eye now. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor at that point in an effort to mask the stress I was still carrying. I felt compelled to describe the situation and my emotions. However, there was still a sense of complexity even as I woke up this morning. Neither of us spoke much while eating breakfast. On the other hand, tension was still palpable that morning. That night, I sank into deep contemplation. I was still confused about everything. I was completely distracted by all the complexity. I went to my bedroom to read for a while. Word by word, the meaning of the book appeared to fade as I flipped over its pages. I still felt the aftertaste of the wine, but it was just what I needed at this very moment. At that same moment, I preferred to be alone with my thoughts. All of a sudden, a crack appeared in the door of the chamber. Francis stealthily stepped inside as I glanced up. I looked into his eyes and couldn't make out what he was trying to say. As if he were attempting to evade something, he merely drew nearer. He spoke with a little less volume than normal, implying that being alone like this must be difficult. I was speechless at that very time. His dad, Dean, was a truck driver, so he'd spent as much of his childhood as I can remember growing up alone. This sensation, what was it? Were you scared? A yearning? Once again, I opened my eyes and remained in the shadows for some more time. I wondered what it all meant that night. I went to sleep after a while. However, my internal discomfort persisted upon waking up. Breakfast was being made as the first light of day began to peek through the window. But today I felt like something was missing. There was an air of odd carefulness about the house's contents. As the bread toasted and the teapot chimed, my mind continued to wander to the events of the previous night. Francis arrived at breakfast looking somewhat more composed, but his expression remained intense. He broke the stillness first, but not before silently setting the table. His voice had softened and he apologized, saying, "I didn't intend to humiliate you last night. Trust me when I say that I slipped in without a sound. I was completely unprepared. I was preoccupied with other matters because I was also dealing with problems with Barry. Our breakup is recent. Sorry, I was preoccupied." I felt compelled to answer even though the topic of Barry seemed too sensitive to broach. "This isn't a huge issue, Francis, I understand. It's just that I tend to be a bit clumsy when no one is looking." My voice was still trembling as I spoke. Perhaps, though, he was able to discern my true emotions. Perhaps Francis was observing me with a keener eye now. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor at that point in an effort to mask the stress I was still carrying. I felt compelled to describe the situation and my emotions. However, I still felt like things were complex even this morning. Neither of us spoke much while eating breakfast. On the other hand, tension was still palpable that morning. That night I sank into deep contemplation. I was still confused about everything. I was completely distracted by all the complexity. I went to my bedroom to read for a while. Word by word, the meaning of the book appeared to fade as I flipped over its pages. I still felt the aftertaste of the wine, but it was just what I needed at this very moment. At that same moment, I preferred to be alone with my thoughts. All of a sudden, a crack appeared in the door of the chamber. Francis stealthily stepped inside as I glanced up. I looked into his eyes and couldn't make out what he was trying to say. As if he were attempting to evade something, he merely drew nearer. He spoke with a little less volume than normal, implying that being alone like this must be difficult. I was speechless at that very time. His dad, Dean, was a truck driver, so he'd spent as much of his childhood as I can remember growing up alone. Francis had it tough since Dean wasn't around very much. However, it was strange to hear it so close for the first time. Didn't Dean's decisions force me to withdraw from you? He spoke. His voice betrayed the intensity of his feelings, yet his eyes never remained motionless. Diana, I will make sure you know you are not alone by doing whatever it takes. Unexpectedly, his words struck a chord with me, but I remained bewildered by their significance. His kind gaze was a stark contrast to the icy isolation I'd been feeling. When was the last time I had been this intimate with someone? With a long sigh, I averted my gaze. A sincere thank you escaped my lips, but I had no idea how sincere it really was. Diana, my dear. I was surprised by how softly he began. Even though he kept his gaze fixed on the subject, a hint of nervousness was evident. My heart began to race that night when I discovered you watching television. It caught me off guard that he would bring up that night. I didn't know what to do. Would it be better to maintain my composure and continue staring at him, or to avert my gaze? His phone beeped once more as I was about to respond. I couldn't resist sneaking a peek at Francis's phone screen as his gaze shifted to it. Reiterating, Barry stated it. The stillness was broken by the low hum of the phone. Even though Francis usually keeps his cool under pressure, he furrowed his brows slightly this time. He silently declined the call after taking it up, observing it for a moment. More than anything else, the action piqued my interest. Francis returned the phone to its place on the table, and sat silently for some time. His knuckles were curled up and he stared down at the floor. Our mutual quiet reverberated across the space. At last, he looked at me after taking a long breath. With a newfound assurance in his voice, he addressed Diana. He stared without averting his gaze for an entire second. It bothers me when you're alone yourself. What you did that night was completely harmless. I get that you were lonely when you did it, but going forward. It seemed as if he were carefully selecting his words as he hesitated. I won't leave you alone anymore starting today. Whatever it takes, I will do. At first, I was at a loss for words in response to his frank and straightforward remarks. I didn't anticipate his candor to be that direct. However, those remarks also made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I began to speak to Francis, my voice barely audible above a whisper. In such a personal setting, it was challenging to find the appropriate words. I really appreciate you expressing this. Contrarily, you lead a life of your own. Concerning my isolation, you should not be overly concerned. A little shook his head. No, Diana, things aren't as you suppose. Dean is constantly popping in and out. It is very obvious that he leaves you alone. However, he looked at me more intently for an instant before continuing. That is absolutely not enough for you. Diana, I'm prepared to take care of you because someone needs to. His words reverberated within me. I stared at his face intently. What he stated was genuine, yet there was also an air of mystery, something I failed to grasp. I spoke to Francis more clearly and with more composure this time. I am amazed by your generosity. You are, however, my stepson. Both of us. I thought we were both aware of the limits, weren't we? With a subtle grin, Francis cocked his head to one side. He mumbled something about boundaries. The limits are clear to me. However, boundaries should not always serve as barriers between individuals. Perhaps we can all finally break down under the weight of this house's isolation. The doorbell rang at that very moment. We exchanged surprised glances. At this hour, who could it possibly be? Francis rose to his feet and made his way to the entrance. My heart began to race, but I remained sitting. The moment the door swung open, Barry's voice echoed across the room. His statements were filled with rage and a desire to challenge. "Oh, so this is where you guys are," he remarked with an icy tone of voice. He looked at Francis first and then he looked at me. "Francis, you picked the perfect moment to ignore my calls. Now I believe I understand." With a calm voice, Francis drew a deep breath. "So why are you even here, Barry? Now is not the moment." Barry moved closer to Francis, leaning in for a hug. "No, I think now is ideal." Because, he added, raising his phone to his ear, I had already heard everything. Certainly all of it. Because the phone was ringing, I overheard their entire discussion. Rest assured, I also taped it. My pulse rate dropped when I heard that. Every word we had spoken. Did they record everything? I could feel my heart racing. "Barry," Francis admonished with an increasingly stern tone, "this is entirely superfluous. Our words were completely benign if you had just listened." In a caustic manner, Barry chuckled. "Not guilty. Is that right? Informing Dean will allow us to gauge how innocent it is." His gaze shifted to me. "Sure, Diana, we can chat. See how Dean responds when he learns the truth." It had not yet worn off. The words spoken by Barry resounded within my mind. My voice was weak but firm as I commanded Barry to stop. "My guess is that you're confused. You misunderstood what we stated." As he retreated, Barry clung on to his phone. "Until I tell Dean, I can't say what any of this means," he added. He briskly continued, "We'll be seeing each other," as he turned to face the door. "In the near future." Before leaving, he banged the door shut. As if the air had become heavy, there was a deep stillness in the room. As Francis caressed his face with his hands, I found myself at a loss for words. Francis stated with a raspy voice that this isn't good. His expression changed to one of shame as he met my gaze. I spoke softly to Francis in case Barry informed Dean. I was completely disorganized. What had just transpired, Barry's intentions, and the possibility that Dean may discover the truth. It seemed like everything was about to topple over. There was a long period of quiet in the house after Barry slammed the door and departed. Francis remained still, lost in contemplation. His silence only served to heighten my unease. For 2 hours he was absent, engaged in a phone conversation with Barry. He kept quiet for a while, then he drew a deep breath and spoke up. He turned to face me and said, "I spoke to Barry." He spoke with a low, firm voice that betrayed his fury. "Tell me what he said." My heart was beating as I asked. An expression of loathing crossed Francis' face as he prepared to speak. "The only thing Barry wants is for us to tie the knot." Here he was threatening me. If I refused to marry him, he threatened to show Dean the tape. My jaw dropped for one instant. "Who would you rather marry?" I exclaimed, nearly taken aback. "This is really insane, Francis. Why is Barry acting in this way?" Frank was silent as he combed his fingers through his hair. "Reason being, he's highly preoccupied. My relationship with him ended, but he couldn't accept it. Actually, though, Barry Diana was never someone I adored. Marrying him would be like jumping off a cliff. I know him too well. Doing that is something I strongly dislike." I was able to let my guard down a bit thanks to his resolve, but the seriousness of the issue remained unavoidable. "Then what shall we do?" My concern was evident in my voice as I inquired. "Dean must not be informed. He has a knack for misinterpreting details." Francis and I met eyes, and his expression was one of desperate need. "You have no idea. Meanwhile, all we can do is wait. We must find a way to deal with Barry's threats, but we must also take them seriously. In 3 days, Dean will be back." My chest tightened even more upon hearing that. A span of 3 days. With the amount of time available, it appeared very impossible to discover an escape route. We were under increasing strain, even though Francis was resolute. At that very moment, the ringtone from Francis's phone resounded across the room. Both of us jumped back and stared at the TV. Barry wasn't the one making the call this time. Dean was the named one. In a flash, Francis reached for the phone and answered. "Listen, Dad." Even from across the room, Dean's voice was audible. Things came to a close more quickly than I anticipated, Francis. I will return tomorrow. We were both taken aback by those remarks. In the morning. At this point we had only 3 days. Before saying, "Got it, Dad," Francis was quiet for a while. "When you arrive, we will be here to greet you." There was a dramatic shift in our facial expressions by the time the call finished. With a look of concern on his face, Francis set the phone down on the table and turned to me. "Tomorrow he will arrive." I knew then that the clock was ticking. There was nothing prepared, and we had only a few hours to eliminate Barry's danger. The anticipation of Dean's return was palpable, as if a tempest were brewing. During the evening we both discreetly went to our respective corners. We were crushed under the weight of the problem's intractable nature. Francis gave me one last look before he went to bed. I couldn't decipher the mystery of the mysterious stillness that resided in his gaze. "Diana," he whispered softly, "everything will be all right." Still, I had a feeling he and I both didn't buy into those claims. Even when I got into bed, I couldn't get my eyes to shut. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Brennan's threats, Francis's powerlessness, and Dean's comeback. In my head it was all a jumble. Not even Francis's serene expressions could dissuade me. It took me hours of tossing and turning before I finally drifted off to sleep. It was already the wee hours of the morning when I managed to go off to sleep. However, the peculiar sense of empty space upon awakening served as an immediate alarm that something was off. The piercing quiet of the home greeted me as I emerged from my bedroom. As I approached Francis's room, the harsh reality hit me as I opened the door. There wasn't a soul in his room. Every single drawer and closet had been emptied. On his bed he found just a single sheet of paper. Even though my hands were shaking, I fumbled for it and started reading. "I am departing with Barry, Diana. I have made my selection. I had to go because I couldn't stand by and watch Dean destroy your marriage. My life is on the line so that I can right this wrong that I have made. Make an effort to comprehend. I promised you I wouldn't let you be lonely, but now I'm the one who will have to deal with that feeling. Ensure your well-being. Assure Dean that everything is okay. I may try to start afresh with Barry in the distant future, but just know that you will always be in my heart." Francis, I lost control of the paper. My chest hurt like hell and my eyes were on fire. He had sacrificed Francis's life for my sake. To alleviate some of the stress for me, he was even ready to wed Barry. The sound of the doorbell interrupted my mental wrangling. Dean showed up. In front of him I was at a loss. Even though I was holding Francis's note, tears were still streaming down my face. The door was flung open. The agony intensified as I beheld Dean's weary yet joyful countenance. He spoke up about how much he missed Diana. With no words to express my feelings, I bowed my head. With Francis's departure, I had filled every void in my soul. Heavy with remorse, I embraced Dean. In that house, Francis was my last true friend, and now he was gone. Dean was clueless. Nobody could ever tell him. However, the pain of Francis's sacrifice would never go away. I couldn't help but cry every time I tried to put myself in his shoes and imagine the anguish he must have gone through to leave that place. Francis departed. The reality that he had given his life for my safety was now something I had to face. You must have been moved by my narrative if you have continued reading this far. I promise you, there is a plethora of more information that you will not want to miss. To share your opinions on this story, click the follow button, enable alerts, and post a comment. I'm eager to hear them. I am incredibly grateful for your support.